Welcome to the Heart Echo channel. Christmas Eve had wrapped the city in a blanket of light, music, and laughter. Everywhere you looked, joy was spilling onto the streets. But just 2 blocks away from the bustling city center, under the lonely hum of a flickering street lamp, all that joy seemed to stop. Here, at a nearly forgotten bus stop, the world was different. It was snow-covered, silent, and felt 1,000,000 miles away from the celebrations. Mark Grant sat on the cold bench, a man who, by all accounts, had everything. A billionaire with a sprawling empire, a name that opened any door he wished. But tonight, all he had was a cup of cold coffee and the hollow emptiness in his eyes. He wasn't waiting for a bus. He was just waiting. For what? He didn't know. He just couldn't bear the thought of going back to his empty mansion, a place that echoed with the ghosts of happier times. The city's joy felt like a personal insult, a reminder of everything he had lost. Across from him, huddled together for warmth, were a young mother and her son. Their coats were thin, their noses red from the biting wind, but in their quiet stillness, there was a flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. The little boy, who couldn't have been more than 6, leaned into his mother and whispered his voice, barely a breath against the swirling snow. "Mom, I think Santa forgot us again." The words were so soft, so innocent, yet they hit Mark like a physical blow. His heart didn't just ache. It shattered. Because in that small, hopeful voice, he heard an echo of another child, another Christmas, another lifetime. He heard his daughter, the daughter he had lost, not to fate, but to his own ambition and neglect. The weight of that regret, a constant companion, suddenly felt unbearable. The snow, which had been falling gently, began to swirl into a blizzard. The wind howled, and the chances of a bus arriving dwindled from slim to none. The mother pulled her son closer, her face a mask of quiet desperation. Mark knew he couldn't just sit there. The ghosts of his past were screaming at him to do something, anything, to rewrite this one moment. He stood up, his voice raspy from disuse. "The storm's getting worse," he said, trying to sound casual, not like a man whose world was cracking open. "My home is just around the corner. It's warm. Please, come wait it out there." He saw the hesitation and fear in her eyes, the instinctive distrust of a stranger's kindness. "It's not charity," he added quickly, sensing her pride. "It's just shelter from the storm." After a long, silent moment where she weighed her options against the freezing cold, she gave a small, reluctant nod. Walking into Mark's mansion was like stepping into a vacuum. The sheer size of the place was overwhelming, but it was the silence that was most deafening. There was no Christmas tree, no festive decorations, not even a single string of lights. It was a palace of solitude, meticulously clean and utterly devoid of life. Every polished surface reflected a man haunted by memories he couldn't escape. For the mother and her son, the warmth was a relief, but the opulence was intimidating. They stood awkwardly in the grand entryway, unsure of where to go or what to do. Mark felt a fresh wave of shame. He had offered them shelter, but this house wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum for his regrets. While the mother tried to make herself small and inconspicuous, her son, driven by a child's pure curiosity, began to explore. He wandered into a cavernous storage room, a place where Mark had stored away the remnants of his past life. A few moments later, he emerged, dragging something behind him. It was a dusty, artificial Christmas tree, still in its box. "Can we put it up?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with a hope that defied the gloom. Mark was frozen. That tree. It was the last one he and his daughter had decorated together. He hadn't seen it in years. Before he could refuse, the boy's mother gently said, "It would be lovely." And so, the 3 of them began to decorate the dusty tree. It was a slow, quiet process. Mark pulled out a box of old ornaments, each one a memory. As he handed one to the boy, a small silver bell, He saw the name engraved on it. Emily, his daughter's name. A lump formed in his throat. Just then the boy, holding the ornament, began to sing. His small, clear voice filled the cavernous hall with the melody of Silent Night. The pure, simple song was the key that finally unlocked the grief Mark had held inside for so long. The dam broke. Tears he hadn't allowed himself to cry for years streamed down his face, washing away the layers of regret, bitterness, and self-recrimination. He wasn't just crying for his daughter. He was crying for the man he had failed to be, for the love he had pushed away. In the presence of these strangers, Mark Grant finally began to fall apart, and in doing so, began to feel whole again. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world hushed and white under a soft, gray light. The three of them sat around a massive kitchen table, sharing hot cocoa and toast. The awkwardness of the previous night had vanished, replaced by a comfortable quiet. Slowly, they began to share their stories. The mother spoke of her struggles, of loss and abandoned dreams, but with a strength and lack of bitterness that stunned Mark. She wasn't looking for pity. She was simply stating the facts of her life. Mark, in turn, found himself speaking about his daughter, about his mistakes, about the soul-crushing loneliness of his success. In her resilience and the boy's innocent joy, Mark saw a reflection of what he had lost and what he could still become. He knew he couldn't let them walk out of his life and back into the cold. This wasn't about a one-time act of charity. This was about connection. It was about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and recognizing their worth. He looked at the young mother, at the fierce intelligence and determination in her eyes. "I want to help," he said, his voice steady, not with a handout, with an opportunity. "You mentioned wanting to go back to school, to become a graphic designer. Let me fund your education. Let me give you a chance to build the future you deserve." This wasn't pity. It was recognition. It was an investment in a person he had come to admire. It was his first step toward healing, not just for them, but for himself. 1 year later, Christmas Eve returned. But this time, the mansion was anything but silent. It was filled with light, with warmth, and with the sound of laughter. A magnificent Christmas tree stood in the grand hall, sparkling with lights and ornaments. The air smelled of pine and baking cookies. The house was full of families who, just a year ago, had felt forgotten and alone, now sitting together, sharing a meal. Mark had transformed his home into a haven, a place of community and second chances, all coordinated by the young mother, who was now not just a student, but a thriving manager of his new foundation. As the evening wound down, her son, now 7, stood up on a chair, his face beaming. He raised his cup of cocoa in a toast. "Santa didn't forget us this year," he announced to the room. Everyone cheered. Mark watched him, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time in a decade. He knew the boy was right, but he also knew a secret. Santa wasn't some magical being who flew through the sky. Santa was the kindness that lived inside people. It was the choice to see someone shivering at a bus stop and offer them warmth. It was the decision to turn regret into redemption. Sometimes the greatest gifts don't come wrapped in shiny paper. Sometimes they come in the form of a stranger on a cold, snowy night. And sometimes the simple act of being seen, of being remembered, is enough to save a life. Maybe even 2. Thank you for watching Heart Echo Channel. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that heal and inspire.